The absolute wars of gods and men are not always fought with bronze, chariot, and shield. Suspended within the suffocating, stagnant heat of the deep night, a single heavy drop of crushed carbon ink falls toward the raw, woven flesh of the papyrus, descending with the terrifying gravitational pull of a massive limestone block being lowered into a dark tomb. The dark soot strikes the surface, bleeding instantly through the microscopic veins of the dried river weeds, physically locking formless chaos into a permanent geometry of mathematics, successfully anchoring the wild unpredictability of the great river's inundation into a rigid, inescapable administrative cage. They believe the phalanx protects the borders of the two lands, but the true boundaries of eternity are drawn entirely with soot and sweat. Here, a misplaced stroke does not merely ruin a sacred document, it annihilates a living breath. In the suffocating silence of this dimly lit chamber, a missing fraction in the sprawling ledger transforms instantly from a harmless mathematical discrepancy into a desolate reality of empty granaries, where forgotten children of a distant southern village will inevitably wither beneath a merciless sun. This is the agonizing geometry of our survival, where the perfect balance of Ma'at rests precariously upon the fragile tip of a brittle reed. The sprawling estate of the vizier does not sleep when the sun god descends into darkness. It is a deeply claustrophobic vastness constructed of imposing mud brick and carved cedar, buried within the nocturnal heart of Waset, where the thick, stagnant air clings heavily to the painted stone columns, overwhelmingly dense with the pungent aroma of melting wax and exhausted human lungs. While the high temples offer sweet incense to the silent statues, this chamber burns the foul oil of anxious men to sustain the kingdom. Harsh, striking chiaroscuro shadows are violently cast against the plastered walls by flickering castor oil lamps, their unsteady flames transforming the endless, chaotic mountains of stacked papyrus rolls into towering, oppressive monuments that dwarf the ancient pyramids in their terrifying complexity and power over human destiny. These exceedingly frail scrolls hold far more devastating earthly authority than the granite statues of the divine. Every woven sheet contains the meticulously calculated lifeblood of a sprawling, fragile empire, charting the exact measurements of harvested barley, the precise taxation of copper ingots, and the ruthless distribution of rations that keep the furious, starving mobs from tearing down the Golden Palace gates. Through the oppressive gloom echoes the relentless, synchronized scratching of 50 reed pens, moving in a desperate unison that forms the true, mechanical heartbeat of Kemet's administrative engine, a ceaseless percussion of frantic wrists dragging pigment across fiber in an agonizing race against the dawn. Listen closely to the scraping of the reeds. It is the sound of thousands of souls being quantified, weighed, and judged before they meet the gods. Beyond the fragile, constructed safety of the Nile Valley, the distant howl of the merciless desert wind continually rattles the high wooden shutters, serving as a terrifying reminder of the encroaching red wasteland that waits with infinite patience to swallow the cultivated fields entirely. Absolute chaos never truly slumbers. It merely paces at the very edge of the torchlight, waiting for a mathematical error. The omniscient gaze descends directly upon the weary, soot-stained soul of VizierRekhmire, pushing into an extreme, unforgiving view of the heavy, dark bags sagging beneath his bloodshot eyes, revealing the severe, agonizing tension vibrating through his rigid jaw as he stares into the numbers. The crown of the divine pharaoh is forged from pure, radiant gold, but the heavy mantle of his vizier is woven entirely from insomnia dread, and unyielding ash. To govern the greatest empire on the earth is to slowly grind one's own bones into administrative mortar. His darkly stained fingers manipulate the counting stones with ruthless, mechanical precision, the dull wooden clatter effectively masking the desperate, uneven rhythm of his exhausted heart, as he constantly translates abstract harvest predictions into the grim logistics of how many mouths will be fed. Every single stone I move across this wooden board dictates the final breath of a father, or the sudden, uncontrollable tears of a mother. Beneath the fading lamplight, he decodes the internal terror of human corruption, his burning eyes scanning the erratic columns of regional grain tallies that deliberately fail to align, revealing the insidious thefts committed by greedy provincial governors who selfishly siphon the empire's fragile lifeblood. The great river yields its bounty to sustain the realm, but the greed of ambitious men acts as a ceaseless, devastating drought. They willingly steal from the mouths of the starving laborers to plate their idle chairs in shining silver, foolishly praying that the thick mud conceals their treachery. All around him, thick beads of sweat gleam brightly on the hunched backs of the vast scribal army, functioning as a singular collective biological organism, laboring without pause in the suffocating heat of the nocturnal courtyard. Their ruined spines curved identically like the heavy reeds. The heavy air is saturated with the undeniable scent of their physical exhaustion, a thick musk of damp linen and fear that slowly rises toward the beautifully painted ceiling, an offering of human agony rendered unto unseen gods who ruthlessly demand absolute perfection from mortals. The agonizing slowness of successfully imposing divine order upon a fractured kingdom visibly manifests in the raw, burning blisters covering Rekhmire's knuckles, a painful physical manifestation of the immense friction generated when the fragile construct of human law is dragged forcefully across the chaotic reality. There is absolutely no divine magic within these sprawling ledgers. There is only the brutal, relentless attrition of the human spirit. The living God speaks directly to the celestial heavens from the absolute safety of his golden sanctuary, bathed comfortably in the fragrant smoke of holy myrrh. But the deeply weary vizier alone must continually answer to the cracked mud of the low inundation, to the terrifying silence of the empty silos, to the desperate pleas of the hungry masses, and to the horrific mathematics of national survival that offer no mercy. He is the silent, suffering Atlas of Kemet, carrying the crushing weight of heaven upon mortal, fracturing shoulders. A senior scribe suddenly hesitates, his worn reed freezing midway through a complicated mathematical stroke, and the entire administrative engine grinds to a terrifying halt as a specific, tightly bound ledger arriving from the impoverished southern gnomes is brought forward and placed upon the desk. Do you feel it? The cold, suffocating shadow of Isfet entering the chamber, slipping quietly past the heavily armed temple guards to lay its icy hands upon the royal accounts. The heavy silence in the grand hall amplifies to a deafening roar as the scroll is slowly unfurled, revealing the stark, undeniable visual manifestation of impending disaster. A jagged, forcefully written, mismatched hieroglyph that mathematically confirms an absolute, impossible shortfall of the critical winter grain. It is not merely a number missing from the page. It is a direct declaration of impending slaughter by mass starvation. Rekhmire's hand hovers precariously in the dim, flickering light, frozen directly above the terrifying papyrus, the deep, uncontrollable tremor of ultimate exhaustion vibrating violently through his stiff, aching fingers as he stares down into the black ink, understanding that the abyss is staring back. The heavy scales of Ma'at are perfectly balanced in the underworld, but here, in the harsh realm of the living, I must actively place the crushing weights of damnation upon them. His racing mind rapidly churns through the devastating, horrific calculations of forced sacrifice, mapping the vast geography of the kingdom against the rapidly dwindling reserves, fully engaging in the ultimate arithmetic of playing God with grain, deciding in an instant which district will be allowed to starve. To rule is to look into the eyes of the dying and calmly declare that their sacrifice is mathematically necessary. The heavy shadows deepen around his exhausted face, turning the human administrator into a terrifying, stony visage of absolute judgment, forcefully stripping away all mortal empathy until absolutely nothing remains but the cold necessity of actively preserving the structural integrity of the entire empire. The agonizing decision is finally finalized within his mind. A brutal, entirely unprecedented reallocation of the massive, hoarded temple surpluses, essentially tearing the life-saving grain directly from the overflowing stockpiles of the furious high priests, forcefully redirecting the divine offerings to sustain the dying farmers. The immortal gods will not starve if their offerings are delayed, but the fragile empire will utterly shatter if the men who harvest the wheat
defy the high temple
perish. A single stroke of carbon ink redirects the flow of human destiny and fiercely defies the heavens themselves. With a decisive, brutal, and thoroughly aggressive stroke of his pen, Rekhmire utterly obliterates the previous numbers, his hand moving with the unstoppable force of a falling executioner's blade, leaving a thick black scar across the papyrus that acts as a profound declaration of order. The kingdom-saving ledger is swiftly, tightly rolled by trembling, awe-struck hands, secured securely with coarse linen thread, and finalized with the violent, definitive, echoing snap of the royal clay seal, permanently locking the desperate mandate into binding law, ensuring that absolute chaos is imprisoned. The morning sun will safely rise over a realm mathematically salvaged by the profound sins of an exhausted man.
The ink cracks the reed.
The last castor oil lamp on the heavy cedar desk sputters violently and dies, plunging the grand administrative hall into absolute, suffocating darkness as the rhythmic sounds of frantic breathing and the scratching of 50 reeds slowly fade into the hollow wind of an unforgiving eternity. The omniscient eye tears violently forward through the agonizing passage of millennia, watching impassively as the magnificent, towering estate crumbles into absolute dust. As the painted wooden columns inevitably shatter, and the mighty, world-altering ledgers are mercilessly devoured by the advancing, hungry sand and silent time. The grain is gone. The towering temples are hollow husks. The furious priests and the starving farmers have all become the exact same anonymous, blowing dust. The swirling desert eventually settles upon a sterile, perfectly illuminated, climate-controlled glass display case, resting silently inside the hushed halls of a modern museum, where a single, fragile, torn fragment of brittle papyrus sits entirely isolated, bearing the faded, microscopic traces of Rekhmire's black ink. This shattered fragment is not merely a relic. It is the perfectly frozen fossil of a terrible, godlike burden. Look closely upon these faded marks. Do you see the radiant gold of the pharaohs? Or do you clearly see the agonizing sweat of the men who kept the darkness at bay? empires do not endure because of the absolute divinity of their kings, but because of the mortal men who sacrificed their living souls in the dark to count the grain.